Can you explain for people who don't know, like the origins of Göbekli Tepe? And, you know, obviously there's the theory that it was deliberately buried, but you guys come up with like, you guys found out, you guys dug very deep.
Yes.
And you found out it's nuanced. It wasn't necessarily just buried all at once. It was like over 1,000 years or more, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's well, so the thing about the deliberate burying is it's very mysterious sounding, and that so when you're looking at mysterious stuff or looking for mysterious things, stuff like that can affect the thinking on the entire site, because then you begin to think, well, why would they do this? Like, what would drive them to build something like this and then purposefully bury the whole thing and leave it? You know, so if that didn't happen, then that's very important to know. And the thing is that
we wondered about this for so long.
We
like
talked
when you
about
hear when you hear that they intentionally buried this massive site, you're just like, what? Why could that be? And so we were going down these roads of like, what was it? A time capsule? Were they trying to preserve a message for the future?
Yeah.
This became like a common idea, you know, people, because this is what you ask yourself when this is
like
a
buried
monumental
treasure.
task.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why were they doing it? Were they hiding it? Were they trying to preserve it for the future? All these narratives pop up because of that. And I mean, this goes back to like my earliest interest in the ancient world was looking for arrowheads here. And you start to learn what campsites look like, what human occupation sites look like, you know, in the Neolithic times or whatever, when they were just working with rough stone tools. And you can see what their debitage looks like. And that's when we first walked up to the site of Göbekli Tepe. It was almost instant. I was just like, this is midden.
Yeah, you can see it in
What
the
is
picture
what
there.
is midden?
Midden is basically human occupation layers. They're layers of sediment that are all of the bits and pieces of debris and debitage from normal human activity. Now,
Okay.
obviously, there
This
are
is-
walls and structures in there.
This is a funny question, because I figured we would talk about this, and it's interesting because Kyle learned about midden, and then Kyle and I would go on arrowhead hunting trips, and we'd be walking, and he'd be like, "Oh, this is midden," and I'd look down, I'm like, "What are you looking at? Like,
It's just dirt.
what is the difference?" Right? And eventually you learn to see it, and it's a lot of times it's a bunch of very similar sized rocks, like that are kind of squarish, you know, and you just sort of recognize it. You're like, this is somebody made this pile of stones, and it's just very old. They weren't carving the rocks or anything like that. It's just that when you bring a bunch of stones in and you make fires with them, they sort of break in regular patterns, and you end up with kind of a gravel, like a cobble-sized gravel.
Okay.
They just look very regular. It doesn't look natural where everything can be just randomly different sizes.
Right,
They're all
right.
sort of very similar, like fist-shaped, fist-sized rocks, and you recognize, oh, there's a pile of these, you know, covered in grass. It's very old. And then you start digging in it. And I mean, you don't have to dig very much, and you find specific like markers. Like there will be a certain kind of shell. At least in the States, you find this. There will be a certain kind of snail shell, all in the midden.
Yeah, it just depends on the types of materials that they were around at the time.
Okay.
Like the dirt, for example, looks a little more sooty. It's like got ash in it. It's got a lot of charcoal. But, you know, there's all this stuff that people collected. There are, you know, tiny little broken shards of flint just everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Well, that was the material they were working with. So if you were in a place where they were working with quartz, then you would be finding chunks and little tiny bits of quartz everywhere. If that's the stone they were working with.
Or obsidian.
Or obsidian.
Yeah.
So there's another example of we were at a place that we had basically confirmed was an occupation site. We was just like, okay, yes, people were living here. We were finding flint. We were finding all this stuff. We're walking away after about an hour of looking around, and somebody finds a little piece of obsidian. I'm like, turn around.
Yeah.
We're going back. There's an obsidian arrowhead up here.
Yeah.
There's no reason
Somewhere.
for this piece of obsidian flake to be on this hill. It doesn't belong here. It's not from here.
There's no volcanoes anywhere nearby.
Humans brought it here.
Yeah.
Is that
And
where
they
obsidian
made
comes
something
from?
out of it.
It's volcanic. Yeah.
So it's little tiny things like that. And sure enough, we found a work piece of obsidian there.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You found an obsidian arrowhead?
It's not complete. It's a
Okay.
little tiny bird point, like a dart.
And where was this?
I'm not going to tell you about that. It was in Arizona.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was near.
Secret spot in Arizona.
Yeah, where was that?
We were,
It was near Sedona.
Sedona. Yeah.
Okay.
just
So
outside of Sedona.
the first time you pulled up to, so which part of, is this Göbekli Tepe the proper, where now there's
Yes.
a big dome over the top?
Yeah, this is
Yes.
before the.
Okay.
That chamber right there, that's enclosure C.
Yeah,
I
the one in
believe.
front there. Yeah.
So
D is the one to the right.
to the right, yeah. So you can see the obviously there are rock walls, and a lot of the stones that you're seeing that are just kind of bigger ones are probably broken down rock walls. But when you look closer at that material, you can tell that it's midden. It's like full of little tiny flint flakes from a people who were working flint every day of their lives making tools. There are pieces of grinding stones, which were they were made of basalt. Mm-hmm. Now there's a basalt outcrop within like a kilometer of this site. So they were going down to this basalt outcrop, basalt is a volcanic stone as well. And it's a good grinding stone. So they were making grinding stones for grinding whatever, grain, ochre. They ground all kinds of stuff. They ground a massive amount of stuff based on the number of grinding stones found in this place. In fact, the archaeologists were blown away. They were like, why? Like, they even did this pretty cool experiment where they got people to grind on one of these. They made their own grinding stones, just like the ones at Göbekli Tepe, and they would grind for 8 hours in a day to see how much material that they came up with. And it was enough to feed like 5 people.
Really?
One guy. And so
one guy for 8 hours.
Yeah. So based on the amount of
one
grinding
college
stones,
one college kid who's never done it before, grinding for 8 hours can feed 5 people.
So they were just blown away. They're like, there are way too many grinding stones here to support whatever population may have been nearby. So what the hell were they doing? They were manufacturing a lot of stuff, whoever these people were that had the grinding stones. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's connected to who built this place, but there are broken grinding stones all over it, and broken arrowheads, broken flint shards. So people were living and working there all the way up to fairly modern times. I mean, to at least medieval times. And I mean, it's being farmed right now. So technically, they're still there. People never left.
Yeah, see the trees up in the upper top there? That's an orchard.
Those are olive trees.
Yeah.
So the radiocarbon dating here says it's at least the farthest back it goes is how old again?
It's like, oh man.
God, look at the landscape there. The view there is just unbelievable.
I'm just going to say roughly 12,000 years old.
Yeah.
Roughly 12,000 years old.
Now, they had a lot of difficulty in the dating. They already had, for I don't know how many decades, an established...
Oh, wow. What a great view.
A well-established dating of artifacts by style. Okay?
Yeah.
So in the whole Anatolian area, they have been digging in midden piles, human occupation layers, looking at styles of flint, points, arrowheads, tools, and had all this, and then had very good carbon dates from those layers in multiple different sites, corroborating the evidence of each one, so that they had a well-established time period for the types of arrowheads you would find. Mm-hmm. So if you pick up this type of arrowhead, they could instantly say, well, that's 8,000 years old because of the style.
Okay.
At the very bottom layers of Göbekli Tepe, they were finding the arrowheads of a people that were 12,000 years old.
And how do they know those people were 12,000 years old?
Because of the dates from other sites.
Because they had dug so many other sites all around Anatolia that had those arrowheads in layers that had carbon datable materials that showed that date.
Okay. So
like many, many times over at many different sites, when they found those arrowheads and they carbon dated something from the same layer, they would get the same date. So it's pretty good corroborating evidence that those arrowheads are consistent with a date of roughly 12,000 years. So when they get to the bottom, the archaeologists looking at the bottom layers of Göbekli Tepe are like, this is 12,000 years old. The burial layers, not the stonework, but the layers at the very bottom that start to build up of dirt, right, that are burying the site. Now, in some cases...
So that means the stonework is older or
it
newer?
has to be at least
as old.
That old.
Yeah. It can't be. Yeah, it can't really be younger unless there's another drastic that like they dug through all that stuff and
the idea is that the people that were making and using these arrowheads were just like very primitive hunter gatherers that would not be capable.
Up until this point, that's who they were. You see what I'm saying? Up until the point of the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, those hunter-gatherers were considered primitive hunter-gatherers who never really built anything astonishing.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have
monumental.
They didn't have pottery. The name of this culture is called the PPNA, Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, because there's a PP in B.
Pre-Pottery Neolithic A.
Yeah.
So they didn't have pottery, yet they were making gigantic standing stone circles by flattening bedrock. I mean, they took a slope of bedrock and flattened it.
Yeah,
made it level.
If you look at in enclosure C there, you see the little pedestal that the central stone is on.
Yes.
See how it's on a pedestal and then around it is flat? That is smoothed, flattened limestone bedrock. It isn't.
Oh, wow.
The pedestal itself is still the bedrock. It's
so
not like
they basically cut out all the negative stone bedrock around that pedestal.
Yeah. And then they cut a slot into the pedestal and then slotted that standing stone into it.
What?
Yeah. So it's not a simple construction, and the floors of the enclosures are smooth and beautiful, and even I don't know if I can't remember this one, but in some cases the sides of the pedestal are decorated in relief carvings. So there's like
high
a row
relief.
It's not high, it's like mid relief, but
they are sticking out.
Yeah, they stick out.
It's not like they're cutting the thing into the stone. They're cutting the stone away and leaving the carving.
Right.
There is a high relief one. It's almost it's a sculpture of a cat.
It's behind that pillar.
Yeah, it's directly behind it there.
You can't see it in this photo.
Yeah, but it's amazing work.
How much deeper do you think it goes? How much?
Well, that's the bedrock, so
that's
seems
the bedrock
like the bottom.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the bottom.
Yeah.
In some places, there's a lot of tunnels in the bedrock. Not at Göbekli Tepe, but in this area of Turkey, they were tunneling into bedrock.
Notice this in the picture here. This is another thing to point out. They had these portal stones where they had cut this. So you imagine you cut a big square slab and then you completely cut the middle of it out to make a portal stone. That was broken.
That one in the middle.
Yeah.
We didn't get to go to the museums, but I've seen some photographs of portal stones like this that have high relief carvings of like cats standing on the edge of that portal, reaching over as though they might be drinking out of a pool in the center of the portal. Beautiful works,
Yeah, so when we went, the earthquake and flood had just happened in Turkey, so we couldn't.
Oh yeah,
so
Ben
all
was
the museums
telling me about that.
Yeah, so the museums were closed, and they had moved 40,000 crates of artifacts out of the museum.
Dude, a ton of people died in that earthquake.
A lot of people. Yeah. See the high relief cat there?
Oh my God, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're most interested in the building techniques. There's
Look
like
at that.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's
so
amazing.
think about this: like to make this pillar, the person at the quarry had to leave a sizable chunk of stone sticking out of the side of that pillar,
So that the artist had material to work with.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's this is thoughtful. This is planning. The guy at the quarry may not be the guy who carved this cat or whatever this thing is. I doubt that it's the same person. So you have to have engineering and planning. And there's actually some new data coming out by some scientists that looking at the entire layout of the stone circles that suggests the entire site was planned. The original narrative was that, the original idea was that one circle was built and used for a while, and then they sort of they put all this stuff into sort of a religious context. Like, well, it has to be a religion. Why else would you build a stone circle?
It's ritual, it's religion, it's,
No atheists ever build stone circles.
Apparently. No atheist ever builds beautiful temple buildings or stone circles or monuments.
Which could be true. I don't know.
Maybe they don't.
But it's like they do all these rituals, and then it's like, okay, the rituals are done, the gods are appeased, bury that circle, dig another one, build another circle. This was the early on ideas. But now it looks like the entire site was planned.
And it's interesting because when you start reading the papers, they with the artifacts and the carvings, they
These
have
totems.
the totems are
Oh
strange.
wow, that is sick.
Yeah. With the artifacts and the carvings, it looks like each enclosure may have had a specific animal type associated with it. So you have like the circle, the enclosure of the cat, the enclosure of the boar, the enclosure of the bird, the enclosure of the serpent, the enclosure of the fox, right? And so it's like you start to think of like, is this a kind of
Magic school?
Yeah, it's
What
like
is your guys' wildest theory on what the fuck it was?
I think it might actually be.
I think the Gryffindors are going to beat the
it's
Slytherins.
the Gryffindors, which is too bad because clearly we're part of Slytherin, right?
Oh god,
Brothers of the Serpent. But yeah, it's. I mean, I really like the idea that the standing stones themselves, at least the central pillars and the flattened platforms, may be very, very old, far older than even the artifacts and found in there. Because that's the thing. When you dig into the archaeological papers on this, they do say, specifically, they say the dates that we get from the lithics, which would be the arrowheads, the PP&A stuff, from the pottery, and also from dating organic material in the mortar of the rough stone walls at the very bottom, give us these early dates of 12,000 before present, cannot date the megalithic architecture. It just doesn't give you the dates for that stuff because it could have been there before that.
the big T pillars.
Yes.
Yeah, and the shaping of the bedrock.
Right.
Also.
So is it possible that, that somebody built this stuff a long time ago and then they just disappeared or went somewhere else or whatever, and then later peoples found
Somebody
it
found
and
it.
started rebuilding it. And then
This is what
some of the outer, smaller pillars are their attempts to recreate. So in other words, they're learning, some of these techniques.
Yeah.
And then
So-
they live here. They build the rough stone walls. Then maybe they cover them over. Who knows,
So we kind of came up with this idea that I love this idea, the idea of ancient archaeologists.
Yeah. There is evidence that people
Think
later...
about what archaeologists do. I mean, the people that have come here and dug out this site, they have excavated the site. They've stood up pillars. They've tried to rebuild some rock walls. So when I look at this site from a construction standpoint, these rock walls between the pillars, those don't look like they belong. The building style doesn't match.
Right.
The rock walls are not shaped stones. They're just sort of whatever size and shape that they are. They use mortar. They don't have carving on them. They used plaster, supposedly. And in a lot of cases, the rock walls cover up the carvings on the pillars. So it looks to me like someone came in and tried to restore an already ancient and dilapidated site. And so they would be doing what modern archaeologists do. They come in, they find this just pile of rubble, and then they start lining up the blocks and numbering them, reorganizing them, try to rebuild the entire temple or whatever it is. And why do we do this in the first place? Because we're interested in our past. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if some people 12,000 years ago found this site and were like, we've got to see what this was all about.
12,000 years ago, that was right in the middle of the Younger Dryas, right?
Right at the
Right
end.
after the end of it, just after.
12,000 was the very end of it.
Yeah.
And it lasted for
Was it like
1,000 years, right?
Like
11,600 or something like that.
11,006 would be the end of the Younger Dryas, something like that. And
So
then,
yeah, you're right.
So yeah, then you're looking at people, this would be just after, right? The end of it, I'm pretty sure. 10,000 something BC.
so this was built after.
Yeah. Well, the dates for the lithics and the bottoms of the walls. Like we don't know when that's what I'm trying to say. Like it must be may be much older than that.
So these ancient archaeologists could have been after the Younger Dryas,
Right.
trying to figure out what this was and trying to preserve it and
Could be.
look
Yeah.
into our past.
There is evidence that later peoples came and dug down into the midden, specifically into the, if you look at enclosure C again, that one, see how the top of that pillar is broken?
Yeah.
And the pillar down on the lower right, the big one down there is also busted. There's two huge pillars there and they're broken. You can see all the shattered pieces lying around in the bottom of the enclosure there. Somebody specifically around, was it 6,000 BC?
I think something like that.
6,000 BC. So, 4 to 6,000 years after the site was no longer in use, somebody came along and specifically dug a hole down to the tops of those pillars and smashed them and then reburied the site.
At least that's what it indicates. We don't know if they really smashed them, but I mean, it could be that someone smashed them.
Yeah. What was the term they used for
Iconoclasm.
that? Iconoclastic. Yeah. So
I wonder, I mean, thinking about the earthquake that just happened, I wonder how many of those earthquakes has this had to survive?
Right. That would be one reason to bury it on purpose if you didn't want it to, if you're like, I'm not going to be here to take care of it anymore, but you bury it so the earthquakes won't destroy it.
Yeah, it could protect it, huh?
Yeah.
But really, the burial looks more like collapses of the midden in something maybe like the heavy rainfall that they got.
Yeah.
Because you can see at the site, you can see that they have used sandbags and all this stuff to shore up the walls around the excavation site, the modern excavation of this site.
Oh, okay.
They're trying to prevent all of this midden and soil and rocks and rubble from falling back into these enclosures.
Right.
So if these enclosures were already, like at the time, maybe covered in midden, and people dug them out, then the midden would collapse back into it and, of course, be jumbled up. That's the other problem with the dating of the site, is that the midden from within these enclosures is in some cases inverted. The older stuff is at the top, the younger stuff is at the bottom.
Oh,
That makes sense. And this is why they thought it was buried. It's like they're just throwing material in.
Yeah.
But it could also be from natural collapses of material that have fallen back into the enclosure.
Yeah, they described the material that was in there as in a series of lenses, which is, that's what the soil falls in and makes this sort of lens shape in the hole, and then another set falls in from this side and makes another one, and then so when they dig through, they can see it doesn't have a stratigraphy really like naturally laid sediment, but you can see that it's several different collapses.